And welcome back to our continued coverage of TIA 2015 Network of the Future Conference. Joining us now is FCC Commissioner Michael O'Rielly. And Commissioner, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we get into, before we get into this line of questioning, I wanted to get your thoughts about your keynote that you just came off of.
Well, I appreciated the audience's attention to some very difficult questions that the Commission is facing, and hopefully I was able to provide some insight on our viewpoints, and hopefully they were able to recognize my perspective on the issues that they're facing with as well.
Now, Commissioner, as you know, we just came off a fairly, well, I wouldn't say even fairly, a very successful AWS-3 Spectrum auction. There were some thoughts, or we heard about some thoughts maybe after that auction that there might be some rethinking of the incentive auction. Are we still in line for the 2016 Spectrum auction?
So I have said that I am comfortable with that timeline, the first quarter of 2016 calendar. I'm hopeful that we can do that. We have a lot of work on our side to do before we get to that point, and I'm hopeful that we can complete it in time. I have said, and will continue to repeat, if there are legitimate reasons for delaying the auctions, I want to hear them, and I want to be able to examine them, and want to determine whether we should delay. But I do not, at this time, have any interest in delaying that auction for the sake of delay.
So are there steps or ways to simplify that auction without really diverting it or slowing it down?
Oh, absolutely. And you're starting to see the Commission consider some ideas that I talked about before, such as removing or deleting the dynamic reserve pricing. And you're starting to see the Commission reconsider decisions they made on impairments. And for me, that's so important. I think that they simplify the auction, which I think is a very important component. I don't have any interest in building an auction structure that wins a Nobel Prize. What I'm interested in is having an auction structure that works and is successful.
Commissioner, you generally supported the 3.5 gigahertz band order called the Innovation Band, but certainly had some reservations. What were those? Sure.
So one is my colleagues and I really appreciate what's being able to be done here in the sharing perspective, but I don't think that sharing is our only way going forward. And some people had suggested it might be, that sharing is the new paradigm, and I disagree with that. We're going to still need to be able to clear bands and have licensed bands for providers. So that's one part. Two is I think that some of the particulars as it relates to those entities that might want to get what's known as a priority access license will be precluded from doing so because of the structure that we've set up. So those are just two instances where I think we can improve the item and make it more helpful. If I were to throw in a third, we need to shrink the size of what's now known as the coordination zones. And that's the areas where no one's allowed to operate because it's protecting an incumbent provider. We need to shrink those so those new entities that want to operate in this space have more freedom.
Again, as you know, the FCC recently opened a notice of inquiry regarding millimeter wave technologies. Where is policy headed on 5G and millimeter wave spectrum?
So first and foremost, no one's been able to articulate to me a very good definition of 5G. We all kind of know some of the broader parameters and what we think might be part of the equation, but we still have a great deal of work in this space to do. And some of that's in the standard setting body, which I think is great. I want to make sure that that standard setting body process is independent and there's no particular entity that's putting its thumb on the scale when decisions are being made. But we don't know exactly what it's going to be. It is definitely going to involve some of the higher bands that we talked about, the millimeter wave bands, but it's also going to involve some of the existing bands below 6 gigahertz. It's going to be a combination of everything we've done before, I think.
Commissioner, I want to talk about the 800-pound gorilla in the room, Title II, and really, what impact will that have on industry?
Well, I think it's going to have a tremendously harmful impact on those folks that are in the infrastructure space and the equipment makers of the United States. I think it's very harmful in terms of investment, in terms of innovation, in terms of product development. There are a number of different things that are going to be impacted because they're going to have to double check what does that mean as it relates to net neutrality rules. What does it mean for the providers that they're selling to, the supply chain, and other things that go into the equation. It's going to slow down that process, and in some instances it will delay or end that process. And that's very harmful to our economy. So I disagreed with the decisions we made, and we have left open a great deal of uncertainty because we only made some of the decisions. There's a great deal of decisions to be made going forward, and there's no timeline for when the majority may make those decisions. So I'm hopeful that the courts will review this process and we maybe get some better balance.
Commissioner, what do you say to people that have opinions that net neutrality violations might just be symptomatic of a lack of competition?
well, I want a competitive environment. Everybody wants as many choices as possible. So I'd like to see that develop. We also know it's a heavy, it's very expensive to operate in this space. It's not something you just, willy-nilly enter. And we saw this as municipal providers that have gotten in the past, and they've had some pretty horrific examples of what can happen if you don't know exactly what you're doing. So we want to be extremely careful. And so they recognize that there's only so, that is not getting in is not easy, and that's separate from the issues and the barriers that may exist in the marketplace that we could actually honestly address by the Commission. And I'm hopeful to be able to do that. So I want to remove barriers to competition that may be, federal or state requirements. But then I also want to recognize what is really being offered. These are very capital-intensive, huge companies that need to be able to roll out, and they got to figure out the margins. It's a business. It's not something done altruistically.
Michael, our Commissioner, I apologize. I want to get, just finally, I want to get your opinion on the FCC's decision on municipal broadband.
So I disagreed with this decision for twofold. One, I don't believe the Commission has authority to act in this space. And we get all of our authority from Congress in statute, in law, and they tell us exactly what we can and can't do. Sometimes it's a little murky. The law is not exactly clear. But here, the language and the provisions that the Commission has used to say we should do this were not intended for this purpose. And I can tell you that for a case because I was there when they were written. So to argue now to use those provisions for this purpose is just not accurate. If Congress wants to give us this authority, and they have in the past contemplated this, they have considered some of these things. If they want to do it, they can do it, and I will implement it tomorrow if that's what's decided. But that's not what they've done. Two, I kind of alluded to this in my previous question, it's the bigger issue, is that it's not something willy-nilly that municipal providers can just get into the marketplace. It's a heavy decision. It is capital intensive, and what I worry about is when they enter the marketplace, do they use their own advantages? Do they use their own rights away against private sector competitors? And so I worry about that space. If you look at the rules and regulations that by particular states that are in place, some of them by statute, some by regulations, if you look at the ones that we're preempting, there are actually a lot of common sense ideas that we're throwing overboard. Should there be a right of first refusal by an existing provider? Should they have a obligation to go and ask them, hey, what do you think? Are you willing to build out, yes or no? We're throwing that overboard and saying no restriction. In fact, the Commission may, if you analyze the decision, it's a kind of completely backwards of how you would think. If a state decides to completely ban municipal broadband, they can do that. But if they have any restriction that's just a little bit less than a complete ban, if they said, gee, we want to make sure that you actually have a business model, you actually have to have a business plan, and you have to present it to us, that's out. So it's completely backwards as you would imagine. You would think that it would be that if you had a complete ban, we would want to preempt you, and that there were particulars that a state had done because they're trying to protect taxpayers, we would let those go forward. We did the opposite, and I think that's just the wrong decision.
FCC Commissioner Michael O'Reilly, a real pleasure to have you at the TIA 2015 conference, certainly, and also a pleasure to have you on our stage. So thanks for your time.
Much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And again, for all of our TIA Now coverage of TIA 2015 Network of the Future, please log on to tianow.org. So long.